we're going to talk garden layout and sunlight for the garden. I am going to totally change my garden up this year. So I'm going to change it. As I was building these boxes, I was just kind of throwing them up as there was no forethought to it. So we're going to change them around. And a couple of other discussion things that'll come up: compost, crop rotation, plant rotation, but mostly layout of your garden and sunlight. So one of the biggest mistakes that I see with vegetable gardens is that people plant them under trees or under it behind a house in shade. This year I had to cut back pretty aggressively the branches on that tree to make sure we have enough sun, and I'm probably gonna have to cut back more this next year just to make sure. So most of your vegetables, especially tomatoes, peppers, melons, minimum 8 hours of direct sunlight. If they are not getting 8 hours of direct sunlight, you're not going to get your fruit to set properly. You might see that the plant is growing and it's green and maybe even it's putting out flowers, but you're not going to get a good yield, if a yield at all, depending on how much shade versus sun you have. So remember, the number to keep in mind for vegetables is 8 hours of direct sunlight minimum. Now there are some plants that we plant that don't need that. Most of your root plants, carrots, potatoes, a lot of those, they could probably get by on indirect sunlight. So that's why I actually, in the back corner there, it's my kind of winter bed. It's a mess right now, but it had some of that stuff in it. Right now it just needs to be cleaned up. But that gets afternoon shade in the summer. So I guess the first step, know your area and map it out. So keep in mind that on a northern hemisphere where I'm at, the sun in the summer is going to be probably over there. This right here will be it'll be sun from dawn to dusk in the summer. But in the winter and in the early months of spring and late spring, the sun is south. And so where I'm sitting right now, I used to have a box, but my house shades this area until about May. This one right here is pushing it. This starts to get full sun in May, but where I'm at in the Southwest, I can actually push the plants. I'll push the tomato plants out to the garden in March, which is a bit early and risky. I will just watch them and cover them if needed, but by doing that, I get an early start on a growing season. A lot of people here wait until the first week of April. I feel like you miss a couple weeks if you do that here. So know your area and understand where the sun's gonna be in your garden area before you lay out your garden boxes. So I've got some over here, and what you see, this area, because it hits the wall, it loses the late afternoon sun, but it's not really an issue. This one probably doesn't get a ton of sun until May or June. These over here tend to they probably get 6 to 8 hours of sun even in the winter. We're early morning right now, that's why we're still in the shade, but and these probably not until May, like I said. These two right here where I've done tomatoes, they get plenty of sun most of the year. That's why I've kind of pushed them back and out. This is kind of my ideal zone for sunlight. As I step back here though, I start to run into issues later in the year with the trees. So you got to take into account that the sun's going to rotate from the southern horizon to a little bit past central, depending on the growing season, throughout the growing season. So instead of just having my boxes haphazardly laid out, I'm going to lay them out kind of east to west lines this year to maximize the space, taking up a little more of that space back there where I'll be able to plant some of those plants that don't need as much sun, but all of my regular vegetables, tomatoes, peppers, melons, can be out here and get full sun. And if I'm doing melons, this box is small for that, but I'm not going to be putting melons in the ground until May here anyway, so it'd be getting full sun. Same thing with over there, which is where I've done them in the past, and that's been fine. We're going to try some things different though. Going to have to totally change the layout of the irrigation. But let me show you a couple of things here. You can see that these were far too close to clean out throughout the growing season. I have tomatoes and debris and everything else in there. That's a lot of tomatoes, and I'm gonna put them in my compost, but I'm gonna have to really watch my compost this year to make sure that I get it hot enough before I put that soil back into my garden. I'm not gonna kill all the seeds, but I want to avoid as many as possible. We talked about crop rotation, or mentioned that we would talk about crop rotation. With the crop rotation, a rule of thumb is gonna be that you want to generally transfer your plants for 3 years. So if I had tomatoes in here this year, which I did, then ideally I'd put tomatoes in a different box this year, or this coming year, and do that 3 years, at least 2 years. The reason is that within the soil, there's gonna be some of the residual problems that are gonna remain in there. So some of the pests, their larvae might be in the soil, as well as mildew, fungus, things like that that might affect the tomato and other plants. So rotate them to make sure to avoid that. I don't always do that, but it's a good rule of thumb. It also helps because tomato is going to be drawing one type of nutrient from the soil, whereas maybe something else is going to help. So, and I want to be careful what I'm going to do, because I think the pea plant is going to be putting nitrogen back into the soil, but I don't necessarily want a ton of nitrogen in my soil for tomato plants. So do a little research and knowing what's good. And you don't have to rotate them. It's just gonna help you avoid some of the issues. All right, I'm gonna fast forward this super fast because I'll probably be out here for a couple of hours, and I am going to take down all of the irrigation that I have. I'm gonna actually take all of the soil out, and I'm gonna put it into my compost. But before I put it into my compost, I'm gonna be mixing in layers of steer manure because it's really hot. That's gonna kickstart my compost pile so that it'll burn off some of those seeds quicker. And then I gotta keep it damp. Remember, like a damp sponge is what you're shooting for on compost. If it gets too dry, it's not gonna be doing anything. Too wet, just gonna be a swamp. So you want like a damp sponge, which means I'm gonna have to water it a couple times a week if I get it hot with this steer manure, which it will do. All right, so I will go and do all of that, and then we'll touch base back and we'll talk. One thing I want to point out as I'm doing all this, that's not the way to do compost. This is me putting all the soil back in and needing a place to put it. Now I'm putting it on top of my compost, which I don't know what that's going to do. The compost part is down at the bottom. I am mixing the steer manure in there to help. There is brown material and green material in the beds. And then I'm going to go clean out the chicken coop and put all of the straw and chicken droppings in there as well, because that'll heat it up. But that's not the best way to do the compost. I just needed somewhere to put it, and I wanted it to have a chance to break down given how many seeds and tomatoes and peppers I'm finding in there. So, and you also probably saw when I was digging up this one, this tree is really trying to put up roots into my garden bed. So this isn't what you would normally do. You wouldn't tear down your gardens like this. You might just amend the soil and add soil to it every year. I'm just doing a drastic overhaul, but it does provide an opportunity to show you how you would lay a garden bed out. So that's what I'm going for. So I'm gonna go get the chicken stuff, put that in there, and then keep it going. All right, I talked about how this part back here gets more shade because of the tree in the summer. I have a very messy winter garden over here, some lettuce and some other things. I'm gonna try to transplant those into this box. Then I'm gonna clean up this area, and then I am not going to put the rest of the beds down for a couple of weeks because I want the leaves to fall first, and then I will go in and fully amend that compost, which I'll probably do a video on. And then after that, I'll lay the beds up, but I probably won't put the soil in them until February, just so it has a chance to kind of compost fully. Okay, got the garden completely taken down. Huge pile of dirt that we need to, once a tree loses its leaves, we're gonna make that into compost. We have all of our beds that I need to still set up. I'm gonna wait till the leaves fall, and then I'll be setting those up over in this area here based upon what's gonna get the most sunlight, and I'll wait to fill them up with the dirt probably until February, just to give it a chance to compost more. So there we go.